I still remember that night like it happened yesterday, the night that changed everything. It started with a phone call. I had been lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly through my phone when a harsh buzz of an unknown number lit up my screen. Something in my gut told me I should answer.
Hello?
Is this Pearl Carter? The voice on the other end was firm, official.
Yes, who is this?
This is Officer Bradley from the Portland Police Department. Ma'am, your mother's been in an accident. She was hit by a truck on Route 17. For a second, everything around me stopped. My heart pounded in my ears.
What?
My voice cracked.
Is she alive?
She's alive, but in critical condition. Paramedics are on the scene, taking her to St. Mary's Hospital. You need to get there as soon as possible. I didn't even remember putting on my shoes or grabbing my car keys. I just ran out of the house, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. The roads blurred past me as I sped through the accident site. When I arrived, red and blue lights flashed in the darkness. The scene was chaotic. Broken glass scattered across the pavement, the twisted remains of my mother's car sitting on the side of the road like a crumpled toy. A large truck was stopped nearby, the driver talking to the police, his face pale and shaken. And then I saw her. The paramedics were lifting my mother onto a stretcher. Her face was bloodied, her body limp, her clothes soaked in red. I choked back a sob as I rushed forward.
Mom!
Are you her daughter? One of the paramedics asked, his voice urgent. I nodded, unable to speak. We're taking her to St. Mary's. You can follow us there. Inside the hospital, everything smelt like antiseptic and despair. The doctor came my way and said, Miss Carter, your mother has lost a lot of blood. We're doing everything we can, but the chances of survival are very low. I'm sorry. His words sliced through me like a knife. I felt my knees go weak and I stumbled back onto a bench in the empty hallway. I didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the cold, white floor, waiting for a miracle. The tiresome waiting mixed with the anxiety made me pass out on the bench at some point, but then the sounds of footsteps woke me from my slumber. Opening my eyes, I saw a silhouette of a man. At first, I thought he was just another patient. He was dressed in a hospital gown, his bare feet dragging against the tile floor as he shuffled through the corridor. But something about him wasn't right. He moved too slowly, his head tilted slightly to one side. His arms hung limply at his sides. His skin was pale, too pale, almost gray. He passed by under the dim fluorescent lights, and when he turned his head slightly, I saw that he was smiling. But not a normal smile. His lips stretched too wide, his teeth bared like an animal. A shiver ran down my spine. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my neck. Maybe he was just sick. Maybe he needed help.
Sir?
My voice was barely above a whisper. The man stopped. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. You shouldn't be here. The way he said it, so soft, so cold, made my stomach drop. Before I could say anything else, he turned and walked through a nearby door. Something inside me screamed, "Don't follow him," but my legs carried me forward anyway. The door led to a small chapel inside the hospital. I had seen it earlier when I first arrived, a quiet place for people to pray for their loved ones. But when I stepped inside, it didn't feel holy anymore. The air was heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. The dim lighting flickered above, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The room smelled musty, like old books and something rotten beneath it all. The man stood at the altar, his back to me. His shoulders trembled violently, his whole body shaking as if he were freezing. And then he started whispering. Low, raspy words that I couldn't understand. The sound crawled under my skin, making my hair stand on end.
Sir, are you okay?
My voice wavered. He didn't answer. His whispers grew fast, more frantic. His fingers twitched at his sides. His head jerked slightly, like he was trying to control a spasm. I took a step back. I need to leave, right now. And then, he turned. My breath caught in my throat. His face was wrong. His skin was too tight over his skull. His eyes sunken and hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the dim light of the room. His mouth stretched open, impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. A deep, gurgling noise rattled from his throat. I screamed. Darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. The morning sunlight streamed through the window, chasing away the horrors of the night before. A nurse was standing beside me, checking my vitals.
Good morning, Miss Carter.
She said kindly.
You gave us quite a scare. We found you unconscious inside the chapel.
The memory of that thing flashed in my mind, and I bolted upright.
The man!
I gasped.
The patient! He was there with me. Did you see him?
The nurse frowned.
What patient?
She shook her head.
The man in the hospital gown. He talked to me. He went into the chapel. I'm sorry, but no one else was found there. Are you sure you weren't dreaming?
I wanted to argue, to insist that what I saw was real, but my voice failed me. Then she smiled.
There's some good news, though. Your mother made it through surgery. She's stable now.
Relief crashed over me like a wave, and tears filled my eyes. I had almost lost her, but she was alive. Still, even as I sat beside my mother's bed later that day, holding her warm hand, I couldn't shake the memory of that thing in the chapel. To this day, I don't know if he was real or if my exhausted mind had conjured him in my grief and fear. But one thing is certain, hospitals are supposed to be places of healing. That night, I learned they can also be haunted. The story you just saw is loosely based on this video circulating on Reddit. In this video, the capturer spotted a weird man inside a hospital chapel behaving very oddly. No one knows if this video is a hoax or some authentic evidence of possession, but the man's behavior in this video is enough to give one chill. When I first moved into my new house, I thought I had finally found peace. The neighborhood was quiet, the house was modest but comfortable, and everything felt normal. My next-door neighbors were an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Turner. Mr. Turner was a tall, thin man with sunken cheeks and sharp eyes. His wife, Judy, was always in a wheelchair, sitting on their porch like a statue. She never moved, never blinked. The first time I saw her, I thought she was asleep, but the longer I watched, the more unsettling it became. Her pale skin looked almost lifeless, her hands resting limply on her lap. I never saw Mr. Turner talk to her. She just sat there. One evening, as I was watering my flowers, I glanced toward their porch and froze. Judy was watching me. Her eyes were locked onto mine, wide and empty. She didn't blink, didn't move, just sat there, unblinking, watching me. A cold shiver crawled up my spine. I looked away for a second, trying to shake off the eerie feeling, but when I turned back, she was still staring. My heart pounded against my ribs. My breathing grew shallow. Something about her gaze sent an icy dread through my entire body. Then, a cold, bony hand clamped down on my shoulder. I gasped, spinning around so fast I nearly fell. "Didn't mean to startle you." It was Mr. Turner. His voice sounded rough like gravel. I forced a nervous chuckle, trying to steady my breathing. It's fine. He followed my gaze toward his wife and let out a sigh. Judy's been like that for 12 years now, paralyzed. She just sits there all day, staring at nothing. I swallowed hard. 12 years? He nodded, his face tired. Doctors say there's nothing we can do, but she's harmless, just lost in her own world. I nodded, but the unease in my gut didn't go away. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about her. The way she sat so still, how her gaze never wavered. I told myself I was overreacting. Then, knock, knock, knock. I sat up, my heart leaping into my throat. The clock on my nightstand read 1:03 a.m. I held my breath, listening. Knock, knock, knock. My pulse pounded in my ears as I slipped out of bed and crept toward the window. I pushed the curtain aside and peered down at my front door, and my stomach dropped. Judy was standing there, not in her wheelchair, standing. Her frail body was hunched, her head tilted slightly to the side. The porch light cast deep shadows over her face, making her look even more unnatural. I stepped back, my breath caught in my throat. No, this isn't possible. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I rushed downstairs and threw open the door. The porch was empty. She was gone. A heavy silence settled over the night. The only sound was my own ragged breathing. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my mind racing. The next morning, I confronted Mr. Turner. Mr. Turner? I said cautiously. Did Judy come to my house last night? His expression darkened instantly. His eyes narrowed. That's not funny, he snapped. My wife can't move. She hasn't moved a muscle in over a decade. What kind of sick joke is this? I swear I saw her, I insisted. She was standing at my door. His face twisted with anger. Don't you ever say that again. I backed away, unsure of what to say. Either I was losing my mind or something was terribly wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Judy's lifeless stare. Then, at around 2 a.m., laughter. A slow, raspy giggle floated through the air. I bolted upright, my skin crawling. With shaky hands, I stepped outside. Judy was standing next to my fence. Her back was facing me, her frail shoulders shaking slightly as she laughed. Her hair was damp, clinging to her face. She stood unnaturally still, like a broken doll propped up by invisible strings. Judy? My voice trembled. Please, go back inside. She didn't move. Judy? Suddenly, she twisted her head all the way around without turning her body. Her face was a nightmare. Her pale skin sagged unnaturally. Her mouth stretched into a wide, grotesque grin. Her eyes, wide, bloodshot, and soulless, locked onto mine. Her lips trembled as she let out another hoarse, choking laugh. My stomach twisted in horror. Then, she lurched toward me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over myself as I sprinted to my house. I barely made it inside before slamming the door and locking it. I stood there, my chest rising and falling rapidly. Silence. I peeked through the peephole. She was gone, but I knew she wasn't really gone. I stayed up the rest of the night, every sound making my skin crawl. For the next few days, I avoided looking at the Turner's house, but I could feel her, watching. Then, one night, I woke to a different sound, scraping. A slow, dragging sound, like something being pulled across concrete. I sat up, heart pounding. The noise was coming from outside. With my breath held, I crept to the window. Judy was standing in my yard. Her wheelchair sat a few feet behind her, tipped over on its side. My stomach lurched. How did she get here? Then, in the dim moonlight, I saw her fingers. Her nails were digging into the pavement, dragging her frail body forward inch by inch. Her arms trembled as she pulled herself closer to my house. I stumbled back, my heart racing. This can't be real. I rushed downstairs and pressed my ear against the front door. Silence. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was all in my head. Then, tap, tap, tap. I jumped back as a single bony finger tapped against the wood. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. I waited and waited. Eventually, the tapping stopped. When I dared to look through the peephole, she was gone. But I knew it wasn't over. Every 2 or 3 nights, I'd wake up to find Judy outside my house. She never moves, never speaks, just stands there and watches. I can't keep living like this. I need to leave before it's too late. A man living in a quiet neighborhood started seeing a creepy woman loitering around his house at night. One night, he spotted her near his fence and went to confront her, but the woman didn't say a thing or move an inch. The video you're about to see is the inspiration for the above story. Let us know in the comments what you think about this creepy video.
Every flipping night. Move. Every night, man, goes to I don't want to move. Like she's sick in her head. You know? Me not touch her, you know? Hey.
When my grandmother passed away, I inherited a few of her belongings. Some old books, a couple of photo albums, and one item that made my skin crawl the moment I laid eyes on it, a jester clown doll. It sat in a small wooden box, wrapped in a faded red cloth. Its porcelain face was frozen in a wide, eerie grin, its painted blue eyes gleaming under the dim light. The doll wore a tattered red and gold outfit, and its jester hat had 2 long drooping points with tiny bells at the end. I had no idea why Grandma kept such a thing. I don't remember ever seeing it at her house before. Maybe it was an old childhood toy, or maybe she had picked it up from some antique shop. Either way, I didn't like it, but I couldn't just throw it away. It had belonged to her. So I brought it home. That night, I had the first dream. I was in my bedroom, lying on my bed, but something felt off. The air was heavy, suffocating. My body was frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't even turn my head. Then I heard it, a soft jingle, like tiny bells swaying with movement. The sound came from the foot of my bed. I tried to breathe, tried to scream, but my body refused to obey. Then, slowly, a figure emerged from the darkness. The jester doll, but it wasn't small anymore. It was life-sized. It stood at the edge of my bed, its painted grin stretching wider, its blue eyes glistening with something alive.
I like watching you sleep.
It whispered in a voice that was both playful and chilling. I wanted to run, to wake up, anything to escape. But then, it lunged. I gasped awake, my heart hammering in my chest. My bed sheets were drenched in sweat. Just a nightmare, I told myself. Just a dream. Then my eyes darted to the chair in the corner of my room. The jester doll was sitting there. I swore I had left it on the shelf. The next night, it happened again. I was dreaming, but everything felt too real. I was lying in bed, the room eerily silent. I turned my head towards the chair in the corner. The jester doll was gone. A chill ran down my spine. Then, jingle. The sound of bells coming from under my bed. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Slowly, a hand crept over the edge of the mattress, porcelain fingers with tiny cracks along them. The jester's grinning face peeked up from the shadows, its blue eyes locked onto mine. Then, it spoke.
Why did you take me?
I bolted awake, my body shaking. I turned my head toward the chair. The doll was gone. My stomach twisted as I scanned the room, and then I saw it. The jester doll was sitting on my nightstand, facing me. Over the next few days, strange things kept happening. I would leave the doll in one place only to find it somewhere else hours later. Once, I put it in the hallway cabinet and went to take a shower. When I came back, it was sitting on the couch. I tried to convince myself I was just being forgetful. Maybe I had moved it and didn't remember, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. Then one night I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold. Laughter, soft, high-pitched giggles echoing through my room. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight. The laughter stopped. I swallowed hard and leaned over the edge of the bed, shining the light underneath. The jester doll was there. Its wide, painted grin seemed bigger. I slammed the light off and backed away, my entire body shaking. I had to get rid of it. I grabbed the doll and rushed downstairs. I yanked open the basement door, my hands trembling as I stepped inside the cold, musty air. I found an old wooden chest in the corner, threw the doll inside, and locked it. Then I ran back upstairs and slammed the basement door shut. I breathed in relief. It was over, or so I thought. That night, I woke up to a sound. Thud, thud, thud. Heavy footsteps pacing outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, gripping the covers tight. Then came another sound, a childlike sobbing, quiet but filled with pain. A voice whispered,
Let me out.
I didn't sleep that night. The following night, I had the worst dream yet. I was in my bed, unable to move. A crushing weight pressed down on my chest. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then I saw it, the jester doll sitting on my chest. Its porcelain hands gripped my throat, squeezing tighter and tighter.
You can't get rid of me.
It whispered.
I belong to you now.
My vision blurred, my lungs burned. Then, I woke up with a violent gasp. I was drenched in sweat, my throat sore as if something really had been choking me. And then I saw it. The jester doll was lying in my doorway, face up, staring at me. I couldn't stay in the house another night. I grabbed the doll, wrapped it in an old red cloth, and drove straight to my grandmother's grave. The cemetery was eerily silent, the cold wind whispering through the trees. I stood in front of her headstone, clutching the doll in my shaking hands. I don't know why you had this thing, I muttered, but I don't want it. I placed the doll at the foot of her grave, stepping back quickly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, as I turned to leave, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A faint jingle. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, started the engine, and sped away. I never saw the jester doll again, but sometimes, in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear it, that soft, eerie sound of bells, waiting. The story is loosely based on this video of a clown doll that this man inherited from his grandmother. Soon, the doll started moving around the house on its own, spooking the man just enough to record it and share it on the internet. What do you think of this video? Let us know in the comments. It started as just another quiet evening, the kind where you don't expect anything out of the ordinary. Brittany wasn't home that night. Her house in Thousand Oaks was peaceful, bathed in soft twilight, the kind of serene setting that hides the lurking shadows of danger. None of us could have imagined what was about to happen. The first sign of trouble came as a strange, jittery notification on my phone. Jason Alexander was live streaming. The name made my stomach churn. Jason, Brittany's ex-husband for those fleeting 55 hours back in 2004, had always been a ghost of her past. But lately, he'd transformed into something far darker, a relentless shadow that refused to let go. I clicked on the notification, my curiosity quickly giving way to dread. The live stream flickered to life, and there he was, standing outside Brittany's sprawling home. His face was gaunt, his eyes glassy with a mix of obsession and mania. The shaky camera panned over the front yard, its neatly trimmed hedges and immaculate walkway. His voice, a guttural whisper, came through the feed. "I'm here for you, Brittany," he said, his tone dripping with an eerie sense of purpose. "I'm coming inside." He moved toward the house, the camera jittering as he walked. My chest tightened. The way he moved, calculated yet frantic, reminded me of a predator stalking its prey. He reached the front door and jiggled the handle. Locked. His frustration was palpable, a sharp exhale of breath followed by muttered curses. Then he circled the house, the camera capturing glimpses of the darkened windows and the faint reflections of his gaunt figure. He found a window. I'll never forget the sound that followed, the sharp, piercing crack of glass shattering. The live stream trembled as he climbed through, his breath ragged, his voice a mix of exhilaration and delusion. "I'm here," he murmured. "This is where I'm supposed to be." The view shifted as he moved inside. The pristine, polished floors gleamed under the soft glow of recessed lighting. The silence of the house was deafening, broken only by the creak of his footsteps and the occasional unsettling chuckle that escaped his lips. He wandered through the living room, his hands brushing over furniture like he was claiming it as his own. When he reached the staircase, the tension became unbearable. Step by step, he ascended, the camera bouncing with each movement. "Are you hiding from me, Brittany?" he called, his voice echoing in the empty space. "You don't have to hide! I'm here for you!" He entered her bedroom. The camera lingered on the bed, perfectly made with crisp, white sheets. He approached it slowly, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the fabric. "This is where she sleeps," he whispered, his tone almost reverent. Then he turned to the closet. My heart raced as I watched him slide open the doors, revealing rows of neatly hung clothes. He ran his fingers over the fabrics, his breath hitching. "So close," he said. "I can feel her." It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them, a sick mix of awe and possession. The invasion was intimate and grotesque. This wasn't just a house, it was Brittany's sanctuary, and he was violating it in the most personal way possible. But he didn't stop there. Jason's footsteps creaked as he walked into the adjoining bathroom. The live stream showed him running his hands along the marble countertops and pausing at the sink. He picked up a loofah, pressing it to his face and inhaling deeply. "She used this," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "This was hers." He opened the medicine cabinet next, rifling through its contents. Bottles clinked as he pulled out a perfume bottle, spraying it into the air and walking through the mist like it was some twisted blessing. He giggled, a high-pitched, unsettling sound that sent chills down my spine. The camera jerked again as he turned back toward the bedroom, his eyes scanning for more intimate relics. He picked up a pillow from the bed, clutching it tightly to his chest, as if it were a stand-in for Brittany herself.
I'll wait for you here,
he murmured, sinking to the floor beside the bed, rocking slightly as he hugged the pillow. The livestream audience exploded with comments. What is this guy doing? Someone call the cops. This is insane. And then the screen jolted. A sudden sound shattered the tension. Voices, sharp and authoritative. Brittany's security team had arrived. The camera tilted wildly as Jason tried to run, his breathing frantic. The feed cut off abruptly, leaving a suffocating silence in its wake. Later, I learned the police had arrested him on charges of trespassing, vandalism, and stalking. Brittany wasn't home, thank God, but the damage was done. The footage of that night stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. Jason's actions weren't just terrifying, they were a chilling reminder of the thin line between fandom and obsession. Even now, every time I see a live stream pop up on my phone, I feel a pang of unease. That night wasn't just an invasion of Brittany's privacy. It was a glimpse into the darkness of fixation, the kind that doesn't just watch from afar, but forces its way in, leaving fear and violation in its wake. Jason Alexander, Britney Spears' ex-husband, was arrested in June 2022 for stalking and trespassing at her California home on her wedding day to Sam Asghari. Alexander live-streamed himself attempting to crash the wedding, gaining unauthorized entry and claiming he was invited. He was subdued by security before reaching Spears. Authorities charged him with trespassing, stalking, vandalism, and battery. Alexander had a history of erratic behavior and had previously shown obsessive tendencies toward Spears. He was convicted of aggravated trespassing and sentenced to 64 days in jail. Spears and her team heightened security measures following the incident. It was just another Tuesday night, and I was sitting on my porch, lighting a cigarette after a long, exhausting day. The street was quiet, unusually so. A soft breeze carried the faint hum of distant traffic, and for a moment, it felt like the city was finally giving me a break. I leaned back, exhaling a cloud of smoke, my mind drifting as I watched the occasional headlights pass by. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Reggie walking down the street. He was heading towards his sister's place like he always did around this time. Reggie was a familiar face in the neighborhood, the kind of guy who'd nod and say hello even if he didn't know you well. He had this quiet, gentle way about him, the type of man who wouldn't harm a fly. Tonight, he looked the same as ever, just another guy heading home. I took another drag and glanced up the street again. That's when I saw them. 5 girls, maybe teenagers, walking a few steps behind him. They were laughing, pushing each other, like kids do. Nothing about it seemed strange at first, but as they got closer, I caught something in their tone, a sharpness, an edge that made me sit up a little straighter. Still, I shrugged it off. Kids are kids, right? Reggie turned down the alley that cut through his sister's block. It was a shortcut everyone in the neighborhood knew. I'd taken it myself plenty of times. The girls followed him, their laughter echoing louder now. Something about it made the hair on my arm stand up. It wasn't the kind of laughter you'd expect from kids. It was cruel. I stayed where I was, watching. At first, it sounded like nothing more than playful teasing.
Hey, old man!
One of them shouted. Reggie turned, confused. He said something, but I couldn't make it out.
We're bored.
Another girl said, a wicked grin spreading across her face. Reggie tried to walk faster, but they were on him in seconds. One of them grabbed his bag and yanked it out of his hand, spilling its contents onto the pavement. He protested, reaching down to gather his things, but another girl shoved him hard. He stumbled back against the wall, his hands raised defensively. "Leave me alone," he said, his voice trembling.
Or what?
The tallest girl sneered. Before he could answer, she slapped him across the face, hard.
The sound cracked through the alley like a gunshot. Reggie staggered, and that's when it began. They swarmed him, fists flying. One girl grabbed his belt and yanked it free, whipping it across his back with brutal force. Another kicked his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground. He tried to crawl away, but they didn't let up. One of them grabbed a chunk of broken concrete and slammed it into his already broken body over and over until he stopped moving. The sound of it was sickening, a dull thud that I can still hear in my nightmares.
This is too easy.
One of them said, laughing. She stomped on his chest, her sneaker leaving a bloody print on his shirt. Another girl knelt beside him, pulling at his pockets, searching for something worth taking. When she didn't find anything, she spat on him. Reggie's groans grew quieter with every blow. His face was a mess of blood and swelling, barely recognizable. They didn't stop. They kicked him in the ribs, his head, anywhere they could reach. One girl stood back, recording the whole thing on her phone, her voice shrill as she egged the others on.
Hit him harder! Make it count!
I wanted to scream, to run over and stop them, but my legs wouldn't move. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my cigarette. All I could do was watch, frozen in horror, as they beat him to death. When it was over, they stood over his body, panting and laughing. One of them tossed the belt onto him like it was some kind of trophy. Another one kicked him lightly, testing if he'd move.
Let's go.
The tall girl said, wiping her hands on her jeans. They walked off, their laughter fading into the distance, leaving Reggie crumpled and lifeless on the cold concrete. I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move, unable to think. Eventually, I forced myself to call 911. My voice shook as I told the operator what had happened, but I couldn't bring myself to say that I'd seen it all and I'd done nothing to stop it. The paramedics came, the cops came. They covered Reggie's body with a sheet and started asking questions. I stayed in the shadows, watching, unable to face the reality of what I'd witnessed. In the days that followed, the video surfaced. It was everywhere. The girls' faces were plastered on every news channel, their mugshots a chilling reminder of how young they were. People called them monsters, demons, and maybe they were. But all I could think about was how easily it had happened, how they'd turned a man's life into a game just because they were bored. In October 2023, 5 girls aged 12 to 15 attacked and killed 64-year-old Reggie Brown in Washington, D.C., reportedly out of boredom. They chased Brown, a disabled man, and brutally beat him in an alley, causing fatal blunt force trauma. The assault was recorded by one of the girls. In December 2024, a 13-year-old girl was sentenced to confinement until age 21 for her role in the murder. Other participants received varying sentences, including a 15-year-old who was sentenced to 3 years in prison after pleading guilty to assault with a dangerous weapon. In our town, there was no escaping her.
Hawk Tua girl.
Was everywhere, on billboards, trending hashtags, and glowing phone screens. Her rise was the kind of meteoric success people dream about. She wasn't just a local celebrity, she was a phenomenon. She had a way of drawing people in, making them feel like they knew her. Every video she posted went viral, and every stunt she pulled was copied by fans across the world. She was larger than life. My younger brother Jonah was one of them. At first, it was harmless, following her every post, memorizing her catchphrases, even recreating her viral challenges. I thought it was just a phase. "She's different," he told me one day, his face glowing as he scrolled through her account. "She actually cares about people like us." Then came Hawkcoin. The way Jonah talked about it, you'd think it was a ticket to a better life. "This is it," he said, showing me a flashy promo video featuring her and 2 crypto influencers. "This isn't just some scam, it's a movement." He drained his savings into Hawkcoin. When that wasn't enough, he sold his gaming setup, his phone, and even his old scooter. "You'll see," he said, more to himself than to me. I wanted to believe him, but deep down I knew this wouldn't end well. And it didn't. One morning, I found him in the living room, staring blankly at his laptop. "The site's gone," he whispered. Everything's gone. Hawkcoin had crashed overnight. The website disappeared. The influencers went silent. Jonah had lost everything. That was when the cracks started to show. He stopped leaving his room, barely eating, barely sleeping. I'd hear him muttering at night, pacing back and forth. His walls were covered with screenshots of her posts, Hawkcoin ads, and scribbled notes I couldn't understand. One night, I pushed open his door and froze. Jonah was sitting in front of his mirror, my makeup clumsily applied to his face. He had tied his hair back into a bun, imitating Hawktua's signature style. "I'm loyal to you," he whispered to his reflection. "I'll prove it. You'll see how much I believe in you."
Jonah.
I called softly, trying not to startle him. He whipped around, his wild eyes meeting mine. The smeared makeup on his face made him look hauntingly unrecognizable.
What are you doing?
I asked, my voice trembling. His lips twitched, like he was trying to smile but couldn't quite manage it. "You don't understand," he murmured. "I'm not Jonah. I'm Hawktua." I couldn't say anything. I just backed out of the room, my stomach churning. Then, one night, he was gone. I found a note on the kitchen counter, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "The world will remember me." I ran to his room, hoping to stop him, but it was empty. My makeup was scattered across the floor, next to a blood-stained razor blade. I followed the noise. By the time I reached the park, a crowd had already gathered. Jonah stood on a bench, dressed in a makeshift version of Hawktua Girl's most famous outfit. A glittery blouse and ripped jeans, stained with smears of red. He'd painted his face white with my foundation, his lips trembling under a smear of my lipstick. "I am Hawktua!" he screamed, waving his arms wildly. "I'm here to save you all! Hawkcoin will rise again!" The crowd laughed at first, pulling out their phones to record him, but Jonah's movements grew sharper, more erratic. "You think this is funny?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "You don't believe me? You'll see! You'll all see!" Then he pulled out a knife. The laughter stopped. Jonah slashed the air with the blade, his movements frenzied and terrifying. People backed away, murmurs of panic rippling through the park. A few tried to calm him, but he lunged toward them, sending the crowd into chaos. "Back away!" he screamed, his eyes darting frantically. "She's watching me! She's watching all of us!" The sound of sirens grew closer, but Jonah didn't notice. His breath heaved as he pointed the knife at his own reflection in a puddle on the ground. "Hawktua," he whispered. "I'm proving myself. Are you proud of me?" I stepped forward, my voice trembling.
Jonah, please, put the knife down.
He froze, his wild eyes locking onto me. For a brief moment, he seemed to recognize me. "Jenny?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Do you see me now? Do you see me?" The cops arrived, shouting commands. "Drop the weapon!" Jonah ignored them, swinging the knife wildly. "She's watching me! She'll save me!" When they tackled him to the ground, he fought like a wild animal, screaming her name over and over. "Hawktua! Hawktua!" The sight of him being dragged away, his face twisted in rage, his body flailing, will haunt me forever. By the time I got home, videos of his breakdown were already trending. Comments flooded in. "LOL, this guy's insane. Hawktua's ultimate fanboy. Why are people like this allowed outside?" And Hawktua Girl? She didn't say a word. Her account was still active, her posts still raking in millions of likes. She went on, untouched, as if none of it ever had happened. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Jonah had lost everything because of her, and now he'd lost himself. Haley Welch, known as the Hawktua Girl, gained viral fame in June 2024 from a humorous interview clip. Capitalizing on her internet popularity, she launched the Hawk meme coin in December 2024. The cryptocurrency initially surged to a market capitalization of nearly 500 million, but rapidly collapsed, leading to significant investor losses. Subsequently, investors filed lawsuits against the coin's developers, alleging fraudulent activities. Welch, though not named in the lawsuits, expressed her commitment to cooperate fully with legal proceedings. The Monon High Bridge Trail was our spot, a place where we could laugh as loud as we wanted, take goofy pictures, and talk about everything we wouldn't dare say at school. That afternoon, the air felt heavier than usual, but we didn't think much of it. Abby, Libby, and I had crossed the bridge so many times before. We just made it across, laughing at how I'd almost tripped over a gap in the planks. Libby was lagging, holding up her phone to snap one last picture of the tracks disappearing into the horizon.
Another one for Instagram?
Abby teased, rolling her eyes.
You'll thank me when we're famous.
Libby shot back with a grin. We didn't see him at first. A man stood at the far end of the bridge, stocky with a blue jacket and jeans, his cap pulled low. He wasn't moving, just staring.
Creepy guy alert.
Abby mumbled, her voice just loud enough for us to hear.
Let's just go.
Libby said, tucking her phone into her pocket. We hurried off the bridge, trying not to look like we were panicking, but as soon as we passed him, he turned. His boots thudded against the wood, deliberate and heavy. Abby glanced back, her face pale. "Hey!" he called out, his voice rough and sharp. We froze. "Down the hill," he said, pulling a gun from his jacket. Libby grabbed Abby's hand and Abby latched onto mine. We stumbled down the steep, narrow trail, the sound of his boots crunching leaves behind us. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely think.
What does he want?
Abby whispered. I didn't answer. My throat was dry, my legs heavy. Libby kept looking over her shoulder, her hands trembling. The trail ended near the creek. The water is dark and sluggish. The man pointed the gun at us and barked, "On your knees!" We dropped down. The mud was cold and sticky, soaking through my jeans. He pulled a knife from his jacket, its jagged blade catching the light. Libby begged, tears streaming down her face.
I'll do anything, just...
He grabbed her by the hair and yanked her back. The knife flashed across her throat in one brutal motion. The sound was sharp and wet, like meat tearing apart. Blood sprayed from the wound, hot and bright, splattering across my face. Libby's eyes bulged, her mouth opening and closing as she gasped, clawing at her neck. Her legs kicked wildly, her shoes scraping at the mud as she tried to crawl away. The blood gushed faster, pooling around her as her movement slowed. Her fingers twitched weakly, then stilled. Her lifeless eyes stared up at the sky, frozen in an expression of terror. Abby screamed, a sound so raw it made my stomach twist. She scrambled to her feet, but the man grabbed her and threw her back to the ground. "Pretty little thing," he sneered, kneeling beside her. His voice was calm, almost playful, as he dragged the blade across her cheek, leaving a thin red line.
Please, I'll do anything, just don't.
"Don't?" he interrupted, his tone mocking. "You think begging's gonna save you?" He pressed the knife under her chin, tilting her head up. Blood trickled down her neck as she whimpered. "Stop crying," he said, his voice cold now. "They always cry." With one savage motion, he drove the blade into her stomach. Abby's scream was guttural, filling my ears with agony as blood soaked her hoodie. Abby turned her head toward me, her eyes filled with panic.
Run!
She gasped, her voice wet and weak. Blood bubbled from her lips as she tried to speak again, but her head slumped forward, her body convulsing as her screams turned to gurgles. I ran. I don't remember thinking, only moving. My legs burned as I pushed through the brush, branches tearing at my face. Behind me, I could hear his boots crunching leaves, and the sound of my friend's screams fading in the distance. I tripped, hitting the ground hard. My palms sank into the wet dirt, my hands tainted with blood, Libby's blood. I gagged, but forced myself up. The woods seemed endless, trees closing in around me. My breath was ragged, my chest aching, but I didn't stop until I burst onto the road. Headlights blinded me as a car skidded to a stop. I collapsed onto the pavement, screaming incoherently. A woman jumped out of the car, her face pale. All I could utter was,
He's got them.
I spent the next 48 hours in the hospital, and when I came back to my senses, I heard the horrible news. The search teams had found my friends, Abby and Libby, my best friends, were gone. Their bodies were found near the creek, mutilated beyond recognition. Libby's phone had captured a grainy image of the man on the bridge, the recording of his voice forever echoing in our town. Down the hill! When Richard Allen was arrested in 2022, we thought we'd feel relief, but knowing him didn't make it better. He wasn't a monster hiding in the woods. He was someone we'd passed in the grocery store. Even now, their screams echo in my dreams. The knife, the blood, their wide, terrified eyes. It's all burned into my memory. And that voice, low and steady, still whispers in my ear. Down the hill! It'll haunt me forever.
In February of 2017, 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German were found murdered near the Monon High Bridge in Delphi, Indiana. The case drew national attention, especially after police released a photo and audio of a suspect captured on Liberty's phone. Despite extensive investigations, the case remained unsolved for years. In October 2022, Richard Allen, a local resident, was arrested and charged with their murders. In November 2024, Allen was convicted on all counts and subsequently sentenced to 130 years in prison.
I was lying on my bed, my phone glowing as I swiped through TikTok, laughing at some ridiculous video. The soft knock on my door made me look up.
Guess who's brought snacks?
Madison's voice chimed as she nudged the door open with her shoulder. She was balancing a plate of cookies in one hand and 2 cans of soda in the other. I grinned and sat up.
Your mom made cookies again? She's spoiling me.
Madison smirked, flopping onto the bed.
First of all, I helped. Second, these are mine, but I'm nice enough to share. Wow, what a hero.
I teased, grabbing a cookie. We sat there for the next hour, gossiping and scrolling through our phones, planning the weekend like we always did. Madison was my person, the one who knew me better than anyone else. We'd grown up together, sharing secrets, dreams, and even our dumbest fears. She wasn't just my neighbor, she was family. I was still awake around midnight, mindlessly scrolling through Instagram when I noticed something outside my window. Movement. At first, I thought it was just a stray cat or maybe some neighborhood kids sneaking around. But as I peered closer, I saw them. 3 guys, moving fast, sticking to the shadows. My stomach tightened when I realized they were heading for Madison's house. I grabbed my phone and crept outside, the cool night air hitting me like a slap. My bare feet made no noise against the damp grass as I moved closer. My heart was hammering in my chest, each beat louder than the last. I crouched behind the bushes near her bedroom window. They were already inside. The scene inside was almost surreal. Madison was sitting on her bed, her fairy lights casting a warm glow around the room. She looked confused, maybe even annoyed.
What are you doing here?
She asked, her voice firm but shaky. Jacobean Brown stepped forward first, his movements smooth and confident. I knew him vaguely from school, the kind of guy you stayed away from. Behind him, Justice Smith and Yusha Mathis hung back, their faces tense and shadowed. You know what this is about, Jacobean said, his voice low and cold. Madison stood up, her arms crossed.
No, I don't. You shouldn't be here. Just leave.
His smirk was chilling, the kind of look that made my stomach churn. You think you can mess with us and walk away?
Mess with you?
Madison's voice rose, panic creeping in.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
I pressed my hand to my mouth, stifling a gasp as Jacobean pulled a gun from his waistband. Sit down! He barked, pointing the gun at her. Madison froze.
Please, just go.
She begged, her voice trembling.
She's not even worth this.
Eustace muttered, his voice low but sharp. Jacobine shot him a glare.
Shut up!
He turned back to Madison, his face twisting into something unrecognizable.
You think you're better than us? Jacobine, don't...
Yeshua started, but it was too late. The gunshot ripped through the room, deafening and final. Madison staggered backward, her eyes wide with shock. Blood erupted from her forehead, splattering the wall behind her in a violent spray of red. She crumpled to the floor, her body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. I felt my stomach heave, bile rising in my throat, as I watched the pool of blood grow beneath her, soaking into the carpet. Her lifeless eyes stared up at the ceiling, wide and frozen in terror. Jacobine stood over her, the gun still in his hand, his chest heaving.
She had it coming,
he muttered, almost to himself.
Man, what the hell did you do?
Eustace hissed, his voice breaking.
She deserved it!
Jacobine snapped, his voice ice cold.
No one was supposed to die!
Yeshua yelled, his voice shaking as he paced the room. The metallic smell of blood filled the air, so strong I could taste it. My whole body was trembling, my hands digging into the dirt beneath me as I tried not to vomit. They didn't stay long. Jacobine wiped the gun with his sleeve, muttering something under his breath as he climbed back out the window. Eustace and Yeshua followed, their footsteps heavy and hurried. I stayed hidden, pressed into the shadows, my heart racing so fast I thought it might stop. When they were finally gone, I wanted to run to Madison, to hold her, to scream for help. But I couldn't move. Her blood was everywhere, on the walls, the floor, her fairy lights casting a dim glow over the horror. The next morning, Madison's mom found her. Her screams cut through the quiet neighborhood, raw and piercing. I watched from my bedroom window as the police arrived, their radios crackling as they surveyed the scene. They carried her out on a stretcher, a white sheet covering her body. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I wrote everything I saw that night in an anonymous letter and dropped it at the letterbox of the police station. I don't know if it was my tip or the investigation process that led the cops to Jacobine, Eustace, and Yeshua. They were finally arrested a few days later. Jacobine showed no remorse. Eustace and Yeshua looked hollow, like they were already haunted by what they'd done. In February 2023, 15-year-old Madison Gesvine was found dead in her Peachtree City, Georgia bedroom, having suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the head. Her mother discovered her body upon returning from an overnight shift. 3 18-year-old acquaintances, Eustace Smith, Jacobine Brown, and Yeshua Mathis, were arrested and charged with murder. Investigations revealed that Brown had entered Madison's room through a window and shot her over some previous disagreement while she lay in bed. In July 2024, Brown was convicted and sentenced to life without parole. Mathis was acquitted in October 2024, while Smith's case remains pending. It was just another morning. The Florida sun was creeping up, birds making a racket outside, and the smell of coffee filled the house. Marlene was finishing up the dishes, half listening to the radio when the doorbell rang. I was in the other room, flipping through the morning paper, sipping my coffee, when I heard her footsteps heading toward the door. I heard her twisting the doorknob, followed by a creak. Somebody's at the door, probably a delivery guy, I assumed. But then, I didn't hear anyone speaking. The silence prevailed for 4 to 5 awkward seconds, and suddenly, a loud bang numbed my eardrums. I shot up from my chair, my heart slamming against my ribs as I ran to the door. And there she was, my wife, my beautiful Marlene, sprawled out on the floor, blood everywhere, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. Her face, Jesus, her face. The hole where her eye used to be was just a dark, gory mess, blood soaking into the carpet and pooling around her body. Her mouth moved slightly like she was trying to say something, but no sound came, just those last rattling breaths and her trembling body. And then I saw it, the clown,
It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching, holding a bouquet and 2 balloons, one of them red. The makeup was perfect, too perfect. The exaggerated red lips curved into a wide, unnatural smile. It wasn't even a smile, rather a deadly, horrific grin. The eyes, God, the eyes. They were black, empty pits. It stood too still, too calm, like it wasn't even real, like it was something out of a nightmare that had seeped into reality. My whole body went cold. The air felt thick, like something pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Joe's scream rang out behind me. My son, my goddamn son, running to his mother, slipping in her blood, trying to hold her broken face together like he could stop the life from leaking out of her. His hands trembled as he touched her, his fingers slipping over the raw, ruined flesh, his hands getting all wet from his mother's blood. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world was spinning. The clown, slow as anything, turned, walked down the driveway, climbed into a car like it hadn't just killed my wife, as if it was just a daily chore. The balloons bobbed in the air as the car pulled away. I stood there, frozen, watching them drift higher and higher, disappearing into the bright morning sky. But the image of that painted face, the way it grinned at me before leaving, burned itself into my brain. The cops came fast. They took one look at Marlene and started talking about a robbery gone wrong, some freak accident. But I knew this wasn't random. Somebody planned this. Somebody wanted her dead. For years, I grieved. I drank. I sat in that house, hearing the echoes of that gunshot every time I closed my eyes. People talked. Some whispered that I had something to do with it, that my business, my dealings weren't exactly clean. But none of that mattered. My wife was dead, and the killer was a ghost. And then there was Sheila. She had been in my life before Marlene died. It started as something small, something secret, a thrill, a mistake, I told myself, that didn't mean anything. But Sheila wanted more, and Marlene was in the way. We got closer after Marlene's murder. We fell in love for real. We built a life together, got married, opened a restaurant. She made me believe I could start over. She made me believe I was safe. And then, after all those years, the cops showed up at our door. DNA evidence, new forensic testing, the truth dragged into the light. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted, Sheila Keene Warren, had pulled the trigger that day. She had dressed up like a nightmare, knocked on my door, handed Marlene those flowers, and shot her in the goddamn face. All I remember is that when the cops were taking her, the words that came out of her mouth were,
I hated that woman. You are mine. You always were. I despised her. Michael, you are mine.
I couldn't process it, couldn't understand it. I sat through the trial in a daze, but Sheila, she barely reacted. No remorse, no fear, no regret. She sat there, calm, like it was just another day, like none of this even mattered. And when they read her charges, she smiled. That same wide, unnatural grin, just like the clown. 12 years. That's it. 12 goddamn years for what she did. 12 years for walking into my home, for putting a bullet through Marlene's head while she smiled. But there was something worse. The way she looked at me, even after all those years, after all that pretending, like she still had some kind of control, like she still owed me. And in a way, maybe she did. Because I had spent so long in her shadow, loving her, believing in her, that I didn't even see the monster staring back at me every night. And me? I live with it. I live with the knowledge that I kissed the lips of a woman who took Marlene's last breath, that I built a future with the same hands that held that gun, that every memory I had with her was built on blood. Some nights I wake up gasping, feeling like I'm suffocating, and sometimes in the quiet of the house, when the wind howls through the trees, I hear it, the squeak of oversized shoes, the rustle of balloons, and I swear to God, if I turn too fast, I'll see it. Those orange curls, that frozen painted grin, those dead painted eyes staring right at me. Marlene never saw it coming, but maybe I should have, 'cause I know I am the one who's actually responsible for my wife's death. I cheated, but she suffered the consequences. The Marlene Warren case is a decades-long murder mystery that finally saw justice after over 30 years. On May 26, 1990, 40-year-old Marlene Warren was shot in the face at her front door in Wellington, Florida, by a person dressed as a clown, carrying balloons and flowers. The killer then calmly walked away and drove off in a Chrysler LeBaron. Suspicion soon fell on Sheila Keene Warren, who was rumored to have been having an affair with Marlene's husband, Michael Warren. However, at the time, authorities lacked sufficient evidence to make an arrest. The case went cold until 2014, when DNA and advancements in forensic science linked Sheila to the crime. In 2017, she was arrested in Virginia, where she had been living with Michael Warren, whom she married right after Marlene's death. Sheila Keene Warren was charged with first-degree murder, but pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of second-degree murder in 2023 as part of a plea deal. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with credit for time served, allowing for an imminent release. The case remains infamous as the killer clown murder, a chilling tale of deception, love affairs, and delayed justice. It was New Year's Eve 2017, and the energy backstage at Katy Perry's Witness tour was electric. The crowd screams were so loud they made the walls hum. I'd been hired to assist her security detail, a last-minute assignment and a prestigious one. This was Katy Perry, after all, one of the biggest stars in the world. And while her fans were known for being passionate, tonight they seemed harmless enough. At least, that's what I told myself. The concert itself was a blur of lights, music, and cheering fans. I stayed near the stage, scanning the crowd for anything unusual. That's when I first noticed him. He was tall, in his mid to late 30s, and dressed too plainly to be part of the glitter-covered audience. His face was pale, his eyes dark and intense. While everyone else danced and screamed, he stood completely still. He wasn't watching the show, he was watching her. His lips moved constantly, whispering something I couldn't hear. "See that guy?" I said to another guard, nodding toward him.
Yeah, creepy, but harmless, right?
"Maybe," I said, but something about him sent a chill through me. He wasn't just watching her, he was fixating. When the show ended and the crowd began to disperse, I felt a wave of relief. The man had disappeared, and I figured he'd gone home like everyone else. But as the crew started packing up and Katie's team moved backstage, a strange feeling settled over me. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on your neck stand up. I was doing a final sweep of the hallway leading to Katie's dressing room when I saw it, a smear of red lipstick on the wall. It trailed downward into a jagged streak, ending in a small handprint. My stomach twisted. I radioed another guard, but before they could respond, I heard a faint noise. It was coming from the dressing room. I pushed the door open cautiously, my heart pounding. At first glance, everything seemed normal. Her makeup was laid out neatly on the vanity, her costume hung up on the rack, and the faint smell of roses from the bouquets filled the air. But then I saw him. He was sitting in the corner of the room, half hidden in the shadows, his head tilted to an unnatural angle. His hand rested on one of her brushes, stroking it slowly, almost lovingly. His lips moved again, whispering words I couldn't make out. My voice caught in my throat as I took a step inside. "Hey," I said,
my voice sharper than I intended. "You're not supposed to be here!" He didn't react. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the vanity mirror. That's when I saw the words scrawled in bright red lipstick. "She belongs to me." "Stand up!" I ordered, taking another step toward him. My hand hovered over the baton at my side. Finally, he moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stood, his eyes never leaving the mirror.
She's waiting for me,
he said softly.
She called me here.
"You need to leave," I said, my voice firmer now. I reached for my radio, but before I could signal, he lunged at me. The force of his attack sent us crashing into the vanity, shattering the glass surface. Perfume bottles and makeup were scattered across the floor. He grabbed a shard of glass and swung wildly, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity.
"You don't understand!"
he screamed, his voice raw and desperate.
"She's mine! She's always been mine!"
I fought to restrain him, but his strength was unreal. It was as if pure obsession had given him power. He clawed and thrashed, his breath hot against my face as he muttered Katie's name over and over. Just as he broke free of my grip, 2 other guards burst into the room, tackling him to the ground. Even then, he didn't stop fighting. He didn't stop screaming. The police arrived minutes later. They found a notebook in his jacket pocket, its pages filled with rambling letters addressed to Katie. They weren't love notes. They were fantasies, dark, detailed fantasies about he'd rescue her, how they'd start a life together. He'd been following her for weeks, showing up at 6 different concerts, sneaking backstage each time. But what made my blood run cold was the last page. It wasn't just a plan, it was a promise. Written in shaky black ink were the words, "Tonight is the night we'll finally be together." Beneath it, he'd drawn a crude sketch of her dressing room, down to the last detail. As the police dragged him away, he turned to me, his face twisted into a grin.
"You can't stop Destiny,"
he said.
"She'll come for me. You'll see."
For weeks after, I couldn't shake his words. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, his smile, the red lipstick on the mirror. I stayed in security, but I was never the same. Every fan in a crowd became a potential threat. Every open door made my pulse quicken. And every time I heard Katy Perry's music, I thought of him, of the notebook, of the words he'd written in lipstick. She belongs to me. Powell Jersky, a 37-year-old Polish man, was arrested for stalking pop star Katy Perry during her concert tour in December 2017. He reportedly attended 6 of her concerts in different cities across the U.S. and made multiple attempts to approach her. Jersky was caught at Miami's American Airlines arena after attempting to force his way backstage. Authorities found he had a history of obsessive behavior, including plans to enter Perry's hotel. He was charged with aggravated stalking and trespassing. Perry's team reported feeling unsafe due to his persistent actions. Jersky later claimed he wanted to meet and talk with her. It was just like any other call, just another homicide in the dark underbelly of Beverly Hills. The dispatcher's voice crackled through my car radio. 2 deceased, 722 North Elm Drive, possible home invasion. No urgency, no tremor, just another night, another crime. When I arrived, the Menendez mansion loomed before me, a pristine facade concealing an atrocity. The moment I stepped inside, the air was thick, suffocating. Gunpowder, blood, something foul and sickly sweet mixed in, a scent that would cling to my skin for days. The bodies were in the living room. The coroner was already there, shaking his head as he zipped up the second bag. Jose Menendez's body was barely recognizable. His head, or what was left of it, was a gaping hole, skull shattered into jagged shards, brain matter splattered across the couch, dripping in thick, slimy clumps. His chest looked like someone had taken a sledgehammer to it. Buckshot had ripped straight through, exposing broken ribs and raw, torn muscle. Blood wasn't just on the floor, it was everywhere. On the walls and on the ceiling, the expensive Persian rug was soaked like spilled ink. His fingers, twisted and curled, were locked into a final spasm of agony, as if he had been trying to claw himself back from death.
Kitty Menendez had suffered even worse. She had tried to run. Her body was sprawled across the floor in a grotesque pose, her limbs bent at unnatural angles. The first shot had exploded her kneecap, leaving nothing but a mess of shattered bone and tendon. Another had ripped through her shoulder, the flesh peeling back like raw meat. The last shots were to her face. What had once been a woman was now a pulp of mangled skin, empty sockets where her eyes had been, her jaw blown clean off, leaving behind a yawning, gory cavity. The sheer brutality of the attack didn't just speak of rage, it screamed of something unhinged, something feral. Then there were the sons. Lyle and Eric Menendez arrived at the scene in hysterics, their screams piercing the night air. Eric collapsed onto the neatly trimmed lawn, his body racked with violent, jerking sobs, his face contorted between terror and some twisted, unreadable emotion. Lyle clutched at his own hair, his fingers digging into his scalp so hard I thought he might rip it out. His mouth moved silently before sound finally escaped. Raw, broken wails.
Oh my God, they're dead! They're dead!
He shrieked, his voice cracked into something that wasn't quite human. His eyes were wide, bulging, glistening with tears, but there was something else in them, something off, something calculating. Just tell us what happened, I said, trying to keep my voice steady.
Break it!
Lyle gasped, his chest heaving.
We went to the movies, and when we came back... Oh God! Oh God! Oh God!
Eric buried his face in his hands, nails raking down his cheeks so hard I expected to see blood. It seemed plausible. Beverly Hills wasn't immune to crime, but something was wrong. The way Lyle's sobs would cut off abruptly like he was checking our reactions, the way Eric's wails felt too practiced. For months, the case went cold. No forced entry, no suspects. But then, the brothers started spending. They weren't grieving sons. They were predators set loose. Rolex watches, luxury cars, designer suits. Eric hired a full-time tennis coach. Lyle bought a restaurant. Their spending spree totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. It stank of guilt, of arrogance, of boys who thought they had gotten away with it. But guilt does strange things to people. Eric cracked first. Dr. Jerome Oziel, a name I will never forget. Eric, racked with anxiety, had confessed everything to his therapist. In hushed, shaking whispers, he described that night. The moment they crept up behind their parents, the cold steel of the shotgun was heavy in their hands. He spoke of his father's startled expression, turning to horror as the first shot tore through him, of his mother's screams ripping through the house. He told Oziel about the way she had crawled, her nails scratching the hardwood, and that she had reached out to him, her own son, for mercy, and how he had pulled the trigger again and again until there was nothing left of her face but a wet, pulpy mess of bone and flesh. And then he spoke of what came before. He spoke of the nights when Jose would creep into his room, a shadowed figure silhouetted in the dim glow of the hallway light, of how he would press a heavy hand over Eric's mouth, muffling the whimpers as he whispered threats, promises of pain if he ever spoke. He described the disgusting, suffocating feeling of his father's weight crushing him, the sickening warmth of his breath on his skin, the way the door would creak shut, trapping him in the darkness, in that horror, night after night. Lyle's story was worse. He had been the first. He had suffered longer. He talked about the beatings, the welts, the bruises that never healed, the way his father would laugh, a cold, cruel sound when he flinched, the way his mother did nothing, just sat there, drinking herself into oblivion while her sons were being ripped apart. He told the court how he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the footsteps, waiting for the nightmare to begin again. How he would watch his little brother suffer the same fate. How the rage built inside him, seething, festering, until it finally exploded into something unstoppable. Dr. Oziel had hesitated, bound by patient confidentiality. He told no one at first, but then he told his mistress, Judalon Smith, and she told us. We arrested the brothers in March 1990. Lyle fought. Eric didn't. The trial that followed was a descent into something even darker than murder. The jury couldn't decide. The first trial ended in a deadlock. The second, in 1996, stripped them of their defense. The verdict was swift: guilty of first-degree murder, life in prison, no parole. Justice, some called it. Others called it a tragedy. Years later, I still don't know what to believe. I know they planned it. I know they executed it. But I also know the look of a victim, and Eric Menendez had the eyes of someone who had lived through hell. Even now, sometimes I drive past that house. It's changed hands many times, but to me, it will always be soaked in blood. Sometimes I think I see shadows in the windows, lingering figures of the past. Maybe it's just my imagination, or maybe some ghosts never rest. The Menendez brothers, Lyle and Eric, were convicted for the 1989 murders of their wealthy parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, in their Beverly Hills home. Initially, the brothers claimed they were innocent, but later admitted to the killings, arguing they acted in self-defense after years of alleged abuse. The prosecution maintained they murdered for financial gain. Their first trial ended in a deadlock, but in 1996, they were retried, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The case remains controversial, with ongoing debates over their motives and claims of abuse influencing public opinion. My phone vibrated, the screen lighting up with Liam's name. I hesitated before answering. Liam didn't call for no reason. He never did. There was always trouble brewing whenever he called. "Yo, come pick me up," he said, low and urgent. "Bradley Beach, now." I let out a sigh, already regretting it. "Why? What's going on?" "Just get here," he snapped. "I'll explain." I should have ignored it, should have left him there, but I didn't. I drove up to the beach parking lot. It was freezing, bones seemingly cold. Liam was already pacing around, his hand shoved deep into his hoodie pocket, shoulders tensed forward. As soon as he spotted me, he got in, slapping the door shut. His face was pale, but his eyes, they were wild, excited. He rubbed his hands together, looking jittery like he had too much adrenaline in his system. His breath came out in short, sharp bursts, like he was trying to contain something boiling inside him. I adjusted my phone, making sure the hidden camera was on. "All right, man, what's going on? You sounded urgent." He breathed in once more, his lips then granting a wide, wavering smile to burst free of himself. "Bro, I did it. It's done." A chill ran down my spine. "Did what? What in God's name are you talking about?" His breath hit my face now, with cigarette smoke and metal. "Sarah, man, she's gone. Just vanished. Poof." My grip tightened on the wheel. "What do you mean Sarah's gone?" He's grinning at me, and his teeth seem to be glowing in the dim light. "I killed her, strangled her with my own hands right in her house. You have no idea how long it takes for someone to die like that. It's not like all the movies, bro. It takes forever." He's chuckling softly as if he doesn't believe in himself. "I thought she'd go out quick, but no, she kept fighting. Her nails? Man, she clawed the hell out of my arms. My grip started slipping. Her whole body was thrashing. I had to push down hard with my knee and pin her there. You wouldn't believe how strong someone gets when they know they're dying." I felt my stomach turn. "You're screwing with me." Liam laughed, shaking his head. "I wish, but nah, this is real. Months of planning, every little detail. And when it finally happened, it was unreal." I made myself stay steady. "Tell me what happened." Liam settled back against the seat, stretching like he was reminiscing about a great night out. "I went to her place. It was a normal visit, nothing weird. We were just talking, laughing. She had no clue. Then, when she turned around, He mimed his hands tightening around her throat. I wrapped my arms around her, squeezed tight. At first, she thought I was kidding. Then she started fighting, hard, scratching, kicking, gasping. It was wild, dude. Her face, Oh man, her eyes got so big. Her lips turned blue. Have you ever seen someone really fight for their life? It's something else. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I pushed the voice steady. Jesus, Liam. He let out a soft whistle. Whew. Dude, you should have seen her. Her tongue just hung there, twitching. That's when I knew I had her, but it took forever, like 30 minutes. I was sweating, my arms were burning. You think it's quick, but it's not. The body doesn't want to go. He laughed like he was telling some bar story. After a while, she stopped jerking. I let go and she just slumped like a rag doll. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. Why? Why the hell would you do this? His face turned dark, and then that weakly, sickish grin crept back. Money, brother. She had that inheritance. Thought I'd be rolling in it. But you know what's funny? The money was all old bills, practically worthless. I killed her for nothing. Can you believe that? He snorted. Fucking nothing. I swallowed my revulsion. What did you do afterward? Liam leaned forward, lowering his voice as if savoring every detail. I had to move the body, so I stuffed her in the passenger seat of her own car. Had to force her into that seatbelt and make it look natural. Her head kept flopping to the side, her mouth hanging open like she was still trying to say something. He shuddered, grinning. Creepy as hell, dude. I forced myself to ask, where is she now? Liam cracked his neck, stretching like he had just finished a workout. Route 35 bridge. Preston helped me. We took her body there, dead of night. It was freezing, dude. We got to the edge, popped the trunk, and there she was. Just lying there. Looked peaceful. Almost peaceful. You'd think she was just sleeping, but nah, she was dead. I made my hand stop shaking. You threw her? He cringed, grinning, like he was recalling some wacky stunt. We hoisted her up and dragged her out to the railing. She was heavy. Dead weight's no joke, man. Then we just dropped her, just like that, into the black waters below. No splash, no scream, just gone, swallowed up by the dark. I could hardly breathe. The awfulness of what he was saying, the nonchalance in his voice, it was just too much. My palms were slick with sweat as my hands tightened on the steering wheel, my head feeling dizzy, my forehead sweating, my feet shaking. Liam stretched again, yawning. Nobody. No crime. No one's ever gonna find her. I looked at him, my heart pounding. I had just recorded a monster confessing to murder. We'll see about that. The distant howl of sirens drifted through the night. Liam was frozen in place, his grin sliding off his face. What's that? I didn't respond. The flashing lights came into view in the rearview mirror and brightened. Liam's eyes widened, panic creeping in. You called them? I kept my voice steady. You just confessed to murder, Liam, on camera. He lunged at me, and I was prepared to push him back. Police cars surrounded us, officers shouting for him to get out. Liam's face twisted in rage, but nothing he could do. He was trapped. As they handcuffed him, I gave over my phone. The recording continued to play. Liam's voice filled the air, cold and unfeeling, recounting every horrific detail. He glared at me, but I didn't flinch. Justice had been served. The sirens faded as they took him away. I sat in the car, shaking but relieved. Sarah Stern's story wouldn't end in silence. Her killer would pay, and I had made sure of it. The Sarah Stern murder case revolves around the tragic killing of 19-year-old Sarah Stern from Neptune City, New Jersey, in December 2016. Stern was reported missing on December 2, 2016, when her abandoned car was discovered on the Route 35 bridge in Belmar, leading authorities to initially believe she had died by suicide. However, the truth was far more sinister. Her former childhood friend, Liam Mikatasny, was later revealed to have strangled Stern in her home during a premeditated robbery. Mikitazny believed she had inherited a large sum of money from her deceased mother. He and his accomplice Preston Taylor disposed of her body by throwing it off the bridge in the Shark River. Stern's remains were never found. A key break in the case came when Mikitazny confessed on video to a mutual friend who was working with the police. In 2019, Mikitazny was convicted of first-degree murder, robbery, desecration of human remains, and other charges, and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Taylor, who pleaded guilty to helping dispose of the body, received an 18-year sentence. The case remains notorious for its betrayal and shocking cruelty. My name is Joseph, and I never thought I'd come this close to death. I'd spent years in the music industry, programming beats and spinning records as a DJ, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on New Year's Eve. The subway was crowded that night. It always is on New Year's Eve. People were heading to parties, celebrating, laughing. I was just trying to get home after a long night of work. My head was buzzing, not from alcohol, but from exhaustion. I had played a long set, and all I wanted was my bed. I stepped onto the platform at 49th Street Station, waiting for the train. The cold air seeped through my jacket, and I pulled it tighter around me. That's when I noticed him. A man stood a few feet away, shifting from one foot to the other. He was tall and wiry, with sunken cheeks and eyes that seemed too wide, too alert. He was mumbling to himself, his fingers twitching. Something about him made my stomach turn. New York is full of strange people, so I told myself to ignore him. But then, he looked right at me. His lips curled into a grin, a slow, deliberate smile that made my skin crawl. My instincts screamed at me to move, to walk away, but I stayed frozen. The distant hum of an approaching train filled the tunnel. People shifted, inching closer to the edge. I checked my phone, trying to act casual, but my heart was pounding. Then, everything happened too fast. A rough shove slammed into my back. My body lurched forward, and before I could react, I was falling. Time slowed. The screams of bystanders echoed through the station. The ground rushed toward me, my hands flailing to break the fall. My head hit the metal rail, and a sharp pain exploded through my skull. I barely registered the blinding light of the train's headlights, the screech of brakes. Luckily, the train operator saw me at the last second and pulled the emergency brakes. Somehow, I had landed in the small space between the rails, just inches from being crushed. Pain flooded my body. My ribs felt like they had been smashed with a sledgehammer, and my head throbbed like it had been split in two. Blood pooled in my mouth. I tried to move, but agony pinned me down. Voices shouted above me. Someone was calling for help. Sirens wailed in the distance. The next thing I remember was being lifted onto a stretcher, bright lights burning my eyes. Paramedics spoke to me, but their words blurred together. The world faded in and out. I woke up in a hospital bed, my body wrapped in bandages. My head was pounding. The room smelled of antiseptic, the steady beep of machines filling the silence. A nurse leaned over me.
You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Linsky.
Lucky? I felt like I had been hit by a truck. Then, the memories came flooding back. The subway, the shove, the cold tracks beneath me. My stomach twisted. The nurse told me my injuries, a cracked skull, fractured ribs, a ruptured spleen, but I was alive, barely. Then came the news that made my blood run cold.
They caught him.
She said.
The man who pushed you. His name is Kamal.
A few days later, the police visited my hospital room. They showed me a mugshot. It was him. Kamal had a long history of violent crime, assault, robbery, drug possession. He had been in and out of jail for years, yet he was still walking the streets, free to push an innocent person in front of a train. I stared at his picture, my fingers clenching the hospital blanket. His eyes, those same wide, empty eyes, stared back at me.
He didn't say why he did it? I asked. One of the officers shook his head. No real motive, just said he felt like it. A chill ran down my spine. This man had tried to kill me for no reason. No argument, no provocation. Just a sick desire to see someone suffer. Even after Kamel was arrested, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that platform, feeling the force of his hands on my back. The train's headlights burned into my mind. One night, I woke up gasping for air, my heart hammering. Sweat drenched my sheets. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the news. Kamel's trial was approaching. The prosecutors were pushing for attempted murder charges. I needed to see him again. Against the advice of my doctors and friends, I attended one of his hearings. I needed closure. When I walked into the courtroom, my ribs still aching, Kamel was already sitting there in an orange jumpsuit. His hands were cuffed, his posture slouched. Then he looked up. That same grin spread across his face. It was subtle, just the corner of his lips curling, but I saw it. My stomach twisted. He wasn't sorry. He wasn't afraid. He was enjoying this. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to shout, to ask him why. But what good would that do? This man has no soul. The judge read the charges, and for the first time, Kamel's grin faded. Reality was sinking in. Months have passed, but the scars, both physical and emotional, are still there. Kamel Hawkins was sentenced to 25 years in prison. It doesn't feel like enough, but at least he's off the streets. I still flinch when I hear the roar of a subway train. I take deep breaths before stepping onto a platform, always standing as far from the edge as possible. I survived that night by pure luck. Many others weren't as lucky. Every time I see my reflection, the scar on my forehead reminds me of how close I came to death, but it also reminds me of something else. I'm still here. I lived through it, and I refuse to let fear win. On New Year's Eve, Kamel Hawkins pushed 45-year-old music programmer and DJ Joseph Linsky onto the tracks of an oncoming train at a Manhattan subway station. Miraculously, Linsky survived, sustaining severe injuries, including a cracked skull, fractured ribs, and a ruptured spleen. Witnesses described Hawkins as acting erratically before the attack. He had a prior criminal history, including assault and robbery, and was quickly arrested at the scene. Prosecutors charged him with attempted murder and assault. Linsky later recalled the chilling moment Hawkins locked eyes with him before shoving him without warning. The train operator's quick reflexes prevented a fatal tragedy. The case highlighted concerns about repeat offenders and public safety in New York's subway system. Hawkins showed no remorse in court, and he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Linsky, though traumatized, vowed to move forward, grateful to have survived the near-death experience. I remember the day Mom brought John to our house for dinner. She was glowing, her smile wide as she introduced him.
We met at work,
She said, her voice bubbly. John looked harmless enough, a tall man with dark hair, a neat beard, and a confident smile. Nice to meet you, Tara, he said, extending his hand. I shook it reluctantly, feeling his grip linger just a second too long. Mom deserved happiness. I knew that. After Dad passed away, she'd been lonely. And I wanted her to find love again, but John? I didn't like him. No one could take my dad's place, and John's constant attempts to win me over only made it worse. He started showing up increasingly, always trying to charm me and my cousin, Liam, who lived with us. At first, he bought us little gifts, tickets to a basketball game and a pair of headphones for me. He joked around like he was trying to be our new buddy. Then, one evening, Mom and John sat us down.
We have exciting news.
She said, holding his hand.
John and I are getting married.
Liam cheered, and Mom's eyes sparkled with joy. I forced a smile. If she were happy, I'd have to make peace with it.
even if my gut told me something was off about him. One day I was in the kitchen late at night making a snack. I just finished a sandwich and turned around. John was standing in the doorway, watching me. I didn't hear him come, so seeing him suddenly jolted me.
Whoa, John. Why are you...
He didn't let me finish. You should be more careful. His voice low and icy. Someone could sneak up on you. I laughed nervously.
Yeah, I guess.
He didn't laugh back. He just stared blankly, then walked away. I didn't pay attention to our weird interaction that night. A few days later, I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet in the living room. John was watching TV and he snapped. His face turned red and his eyes bloodshot in anger. "Do you know how expensive this carpet is?" He shouted, leaning down on my face. His bad breath and spit almost made me vomit.
I'm sorry.
I stammered. "Sorry isn't good enough," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You need to do better. Do you understand me?" He grabbed me by my shoulders and shook me like some helpless lamb. I nodded quickly, almost tearing up. And then there was the night I heard them arguing. Mom's voice was shaky, pleading.
John, please, calm down.
She said. "Don't tell me to calm down!" He roared. I peeked into the living room, my stomach twisting. John was towering over her, his fists clenched. Mom looked so small and scared. Her chin was bleeding and she had bruises on her arms. Enough is enough. I decided to dig into John's past. I found an old shoebox in his closet, hidden beneath a pile of clothes. Inside were fake IDs, credit cards with different names, and stacks of cash. My hands trembled as I pieced it together. John wasn't who he said he was. He's lying. He's lying to my mom, to all of us. I had to tell Mom, but I wanted to wait until I got home from school the next day. I wanted Liam there too. That afternoon, as the final bell rang, I grabbed my backpack and headed toward the parking lot. I was unlocking my bike's chain when a familiar voice spoke behind me. "Did you go through my belongings, sweetheart?" Drops of sweat appeared on my forehead as I turned around. John was leaning on me, a dark, evil smile on his face. "Tara, Tara, Tara," he said, his voice calm but menacing. "We need to talk."
I don't want to talk to you.
I said, backing away. He took a step closer, pulling a knife from his jacket. "You should have minded your own business, little birdie." The parking lot was nearly empty. I screamed for help and my voice echoed into the void, but no one heard me. I tried to run, but John lunged at me, twisting my arm. I fought back, kicking and struggling, but he started dragging me toward his car. He stomped me on the bonnet and then stabbed me in the shoulder. The feeling of flesh slashing and blood pouring is not something any teenager should experience. I knew if I gave up, this man would kill me and make my death seem like an accident. Adrenaline surged through me. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it as hard as I could. The knife clattered to the ground and I dove for it. "Let go!" he shouted, trying to pull me back, but I was faster. I swung the knife toward him, my hand trembling. He lunged again, and I reacted on instinct, plunging the blade into his chest. He stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock, then collapsed onto the pavement. I stood there, gasping for breath, blood dripping from my shoulder. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the knife. A teacher ran over, shouting for help. Sirens wailed in the distance as the world blurred around me. The Tara Newell case is a remarkable story of survival and resilience, highlighted in the true crime podcast and TV series Dirty John. Tara, the youngest daughter of Deborah Newell, became the unexpected hero in a terrifying encounter with John Meehan, a con artist and abusive man who manipulated Deborah into a toxic relationship. On August 20th, 2016, John ambushed Tara in a parking lot with the intent to harm her after his manipulative schemes were exposed. However, Tara fought back fiercely. Despite being attacked with a knife, she managed to wrestle it away and fatally stab him in self-defense.
Her quick thinking and bravery saved her life. The case sheds light on the dangers of abusive relationships, the power of self-defense, and the strength of the human spirit. Tara's actions made her a symbol of courage, inspiring others to trust their instincts and fight for their safety. It was just another Friday night when I decided to hit up the Rusty Keg, a dimly lit pub tucked in the corner of town. I needed the break after a grueling week at work. The loud laughter, the smell of stale beer, and the low hum of conversation offered a sort of comforting chaos. I was sipping my second drink when he walked in. Samuel, tall, rugged, with a cocky smirk that made it clear he knew the effect he had on people. He slid onto the bar stool next to me and offered a casual, "Hey, what's a pretty girl like you doing here all alone?" I chuckled, half flattered, half embarrassed. "Just unwinding. Long week, you know?" He grinned. "Well, lucky me. I get to end my week meeting you." We bantered for a while, his compliments becoming bolder as the night wore on. When he told me I was beautiful, my cheeks turned pink, and I nervously toyed with the rim of my glass. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. Not in the way I dreaded, but in a way that made me feel normal. After a couple of drinks, my phone buzzed. It was my roommate, Brooke. When I hung up, Samuel's curiosity got the better of him. "Your roommate?" he asked casually. I nodded. "I need to buy shaving cream for her." Samuel asked disappointedly, "So your roommate's a guy, huh?" That's it. I knew the moment had come where I had to tell him. I liked him, but I was worried the truth might scare him away. I hesitated for a second, then answered, fumbling, My roommate's trans, and so am I." The words hung in the air like a balloon ready to pop. I braced myself for the reaction I'd seen so many times before. Disgust, awkward excuses, anything to get away from me. Samuel blinked, his expression unreadable. My heart sank and I quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to lead you on. I thought... Never mind." Grabbing my bag, I bolted out of the bar, my face burning with shame. I couldn't believe I'd let myself get comfortable, let myself hope. Heartbroken, I walked down the street to the 24-hour store, grabbed the shaving cream, and headed out into the humid night. That's when I saw it, the gold Pontiac Le Mans, parked at the curb. Samuel leaned against it, his smile wider this time. "Hey," he called out. "Thought I'd give you a ride, save you the walk." My heart flipped. Maybe I'd been wrong about him. Maybe he wasn't like the others. Hesitant but hopeful, I climbed into the passenger seat. The car ride started fine, Samuel chatting about the bar and the night, but soon his tone shifted, subtle at first. Questions that felt too probing, compliments that carried an edge. Then he turned off the highway. This isn't the way to my place," I said, my voice trembling. "Shortcut," Samuel replied, his grin gone. His eyes stayed locked on the road, his hands gripping my thighs so tightly that his nails dug into my skin, making me bleed. My stomach churned. I reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. "There's no point in running now." His chilling voice echoed to my ears. He stopped the car near a sugarcane field. What are we doing here?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. Samuel smiled at me without blinking, then lunged. His fist hit my jaw like a brick, and stars exploded in my head. I screamed, clawing at the door, but he was faster. His hand wrapped around my neck, his grip getting tighter each second. Then he slammed my head against the dashboard. Pain shot through my skull, and everything went black. When I came to my senses, I found myself being dragged. My body scraped against the wet, muddy ground, and the smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. Where was he taking me? I kept my eyes closed, playing dead. My heart throbbed and my limbs felt like lead, but the primal urge to survive kept me still. I could hear Samuel whistling while dragging my numb body. What kind of sick psycho is he?
I knew what was coming. I could feel death looming, its cold breath on the back of my neck. But I waited for a moment, one chance, one opportunity. Finally, he dropped me and walked back toward the car to get something. This was it. Summoning every ounce of strength, I got up and bolted. My bare feet dug into the muddy ground, and my body screamed in protest. I didn't look back, didn't care if he saw me. My wig was gone, my makeup smeared, my clothes torn and soaked, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was running. The sugarcane field seemed endless, but finally I saw headlights on the highway. I stumbled onto the asphalt, waving my arms and screaming for help. A truck screeched to a halt, and the driver jumped out, horrified at the sight of me.
Help me!
I gasped, collapsing into his arms.
Please!
The story you just saw is based on the murder of a 19-year-old transgender woman named Mary Ann at the hands of Samuel Little, the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. Even though in the above story Mary Ann made it out alive, in reality she suffered an even worse fate. While serving his life in prison, Samuel Little confessed about Mary Ann. He met Mary Ann at a bar in Miami and later reconnected at another bar in Overtown, offering her a ride home. After a stop to buy shaving cream, they returned to Little's car, a gold Pontiac Le Mans. Instead of taking her home, Little drove her north on Highway 27, killing her near a sugarcane field. He then continued into the Everglades, dragging her body about 200 yards into muddy water near a swamp. Little believed her body was never recovered. It started like any other glamorous evening. The air outside was freezing, thick with the unmistakable New Year's buzz. Inside the venue was alive with light and chatter. Emma Watson, the star of the night, looked every bit the icon, calm, radiant, and focused. Everything seemed perfect. The first time I saw him, he was just another face in the crowd, hanging back near the service doors. At first glance, he didn't stand out, but then I noticed his eyes. They didn't just follow Emma, they locked onto her, like she was the only person in the world. His clothes looked scruffy, his hair unkempt, and there was the strange stiffness and how he stood like he was forcing himself to stay still.
Doesn't that guy seem odd?
I whispered to one of the security guards. Over by the doors? The guard glanced over and nodded. I'll check him out. I watched as the guard approached him. The man didn't argue or resist. He just backed off into the crowd, his eyes still darting toward Emma whenever he thought no one was watching. I shook off the unease. These events always had a few overzealous fans. No big deal, right? Until the scraping started. I was by the dressing rooms, checking the final schedule, when I heard it. A faint metallic sound, like something sharp being dragged over metal. My stomach knotted. At first, I thought it was just one of the crew adjusting equipment. Then it came again. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Heart pounding, I turned the corner toward the sound, and there he was. He was crouched at Emma's dressing room door, a thin piece of metal in his hand. A lockpick. But that wasn't all. His other hand was pressed against the door, fingers clawing at the wood, his nails scraping so hard that they were splintering and cracking. Blood dripped from his fingertips, smeared across the door like some grotesque message. I froze, watching in horror as one of his nails bent back completely, snapping off with a sickening crack. He didn't flinch. He didn't stop.
Emma's my bride. We're gonna get married. Trust me, I'm not lying.
He whispered, his voice shaking but determined.
Oi! What the hell are you doing?
I shouted. His head snapped up, his eyes wide and wild. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he smiled. Not a normal smile. This was slow, twisted, as he'd been just caught doing something he was proud of.
You don't get it,
he said, his voice low and shaky.
She's mine. She's always been mine.
Before I could react, he lunged at the door, slamming his shoulder into it with a force that shook the frame. Inside, I heard Emma's panicked voice calling for security. I yelled for help.
but he kept battering the door, each impact more frantic than the last, his bloody handprints smearing across the wood. When the security team arrived, they grabbed him and dragged him away. He thrashed and screamed, his voice echoing down the hallway.
You can't keep us apart! She's mine! She's been waiting for me!
Even as they hauled him off, he kept his eyes fixed on the door, his grin unshaken. The sight of his bloodied, nailless fingers burned itself into my mind. I thought that was the end of it. Emma insisted on finishing the evening, her composure unbroken. But as we walked her to the car later, the air felt heavier and colder. Security swept the lot, giving the all clear, and Emma stepped into the car. Just as the door closed, one of the guards' radios crackled.
There's something by the back exit,
a voice said, tight with tension. The team moved swiftly, and I followed, my stomach twisting. At the far end of the lot, near the service entrance, they found it. The door he'd been clawing at earlier, now splattered with fresh blood and scratched to splinters. Next to it lay a pile of Emma's photos, torn from magazines, printed from the internet, all smeared with streaks of red, along with obscene and filthy desires and fantasies of him with Emma were written behind them. Above them was a note scrawled in what we could only assume was his own blood. She is mine. You'll never stop me. Emma left that night under heavy protection, and the event organizers promised tighter security measures in the future, but no amount of assurances could ever erase what had happened. I still see his face in my nightmares, the lipstick smeared like a twisted mask, his words playing on a loop in my mind. Men like Chad don't stop. They find cracks to slip through and shadows to linger in, and even when they're gone, their presence stays behind, a dark stain that never quite fades. In September 2023, Chad Michael Busto, 43, was arrested for trespassing at a New York Fashion Week event, where he allegedly entered a dressing room and shouted his desire to marry actress Emma Watson. He was charged with criminal trespass and disorderly conduct. Busto has a history of similar incidents, including attempting to approach actress Drew Barrymore. In June 2024, he was arrested in Oxford, UK, after seeking information about Watson at the university where she was studying. Authorities detained him on suspicion of stalking and later released him under investigation. My name is Anna, and I work as a showgirl in Las Vegas. It's not a glamorous life, but it's the one I built for myself after running away from my abusive parents at 17. With no degree and no skill that could land me a good job, I had to take whatever came my way. That's how I ended up here, on a dimly lit stage, dancing under neon lights, surrounded by men with lustful eyes. The nightclub was packed as usual. The air was thick with smoke and the scent of cheap cologne. Men sat at small, sticky tables, sipping overpriced drinks while watching us perform. My heels clicked against the stage as I danced, the pole cold against my skin. I was used to the stares by now, even the occasional whistles and shouts. It was part of the job. But that night, one customer stood out. He was sitting in the far corner, shrouded in shadows. I wouldn't have noticed him at all if it weren't for his eyes. They seemed to glow, almost like a predator's eyes in the dark. They never left me, watching every move I made. A chill ran down my spine, but I pushed the feeling aside. Creepy guys came with the territory. When my set ended, I headed to the bar for a quick drink of water. That's when he approached me. "Anna," he said, his voice low and smooth. I froze. How did he know my name? He smiled, his teeth unnervingly white. "Your performance was mesmerizing,"
Thanks.
I said flatly, not wanting to encourage him. He extended a hand. "I'm Yoni." I didn't take it.
Nice to meet you.
I said, keeping my distance. "Let me buy you a drink," he offered, his tone insistent.
No thanks.
I said, trying to be polite. "Come on," he pressed, his smile tightening. "Just one drink."
I said no.
I replied, stepping away. As I turned to leave, I heard the crash of glass behind me. I whipped around to see Yanni standing there, blood dripping from his hand. He had crushed the glass he was holding, and shards were embedded in his palm, but he was smiling. "Oops," he said, his voice light, as if it were a joke. My stomach churned. I hurried away, my heart pounding, and found two of my co-workers, Lisa and Jade, smoking outside in the back alley.
Some guy just freaked me out.
I told them, trying to shake off the unease. Before they could respond, Yanni appeared, stepping out of the shadows like he'd been waiting there the whole time. "There you are, Anna," he said, his voice dripping with something I couldn't place. Obsession, maybe. "I thought we were getting to know each other." Lisa narrowed her eyes.
Who the hell is this?
"I just wanted a picture," Yanni said, ignoring Lisa and staring straight at me. "A picture with the most beautiful girl in the club."
No. Leave me alone.
He stepped closer, and Lisa, always the fiery one, slapped him hard across the face.
Did you not hear her? She said no, you creep.
I backed away, shaking.
Yoni, I'm serious. Leave me alone. A no is a no. Do you understand that?
For a moment, he just stood there, his face calm, his eyes dead. Then he turned and walked away. Lisa snorted.
What a psycho.
But before we could even breathe a sigh of relief, he came back running. This time, he wasn't alone. He was holding a knife. Lisa saw it first.
What the?
Before she could finish, Yanni lunged at her, the blade flashing under the alley's dim light. He stabbed her once, then again, and again, laughing as he did it. The sound of his laughter, high-pitched and hysterical, will haunt me forever. Jade screamed, but I was frozen, my feet rooted to the ground as Lisa's blood pooled beneath her. Yanni turned to me, his smile wide and insane. "You can't leave, Anna," he said, his voice almost sing-song. "You can't get away insulting me. No one does." I snapped out of it and ran, my heels clattering against the pavement. But he was faster. He grabbed me by the hair, yanking me back so hard I thought my scalp would tear. "Don't run from me!" he shouted, his voice suddenly filled with rage. I screamed as I felt the knife pierce my back. The pain was searing, blinding, but adrenaline kicked in, and I twisted out of his grip, falling to the ground. By then, the chaos had spilled into the club. People were screaming, running in every direction. Jade shouted for security, tears streaming down her face as she cradled Lisa. Yanni tried to run, but the bouncers tackled him to the ground. He thrashed and screamed, his laughter turning into guttural howls. The cops arrived minutes later, dragging him away in cuffs. I was rushed to the hospital, my vision blurring as the pain in my back became unbearable. Lisa didn't make it. Even now, I can still see Yanni's face when I close my eyes, his glowing eyes, his twisted smile, his blood-stained hands. That night didn't just change my life, it ended someone else's. I survived, but I'll never feel safe again. On October 6, 2022, Yanni Barrios carried out a stabbing spree along the Las Vegas Strip, resulting in 2 deaths and 6 injuries. The attack began after Barrios approached a group of showgirl impersonators, and when they declined his request for a photo, he began attacking them and others nearby. Barrios exhibited a lack of empathy and remorse, attacking strangers. His actions were impulsive and violent, aligning with behaviors often associated with psychopathy. The random nature of the attacks in a popular tourist area combined with the brutality of the stabbings left the community and nation in shock. The camera crew sets up, their equipment humming, and the harsh white lights make the prison walls seem even more lifeless. The journalist clears his throat, adjusting his recorder. He's trying to mask his nerves, but I see the way his fingers tremble slightly as he clicks his pen. The red recording light blinks. "Ready?" he asks, his voice steady but unsure. I nod. My throat is dry, my palms clammy. And then, just like that, I'm back there. It was hot that night, the air thick, damp, pressing down like an unseen weight.
The kind of night that makes your skin itch, that makes the world feel wrong. Skylar was so happy. She sat in the back seat, smiling, laughing, oblivious. She had no idea. She talked about the future, about college, about how we'd always stay together. Her voice was light, full of dreams. It almost made me hesitate. Almost. She slipped out her window at midnight, hoodie pulled over her head, slipping into the car like she always did. She smelled like vanilla perfume. I remember that. We drove deep into the woods. The road stretched endlessly, the trees closing in on us. The headlights cast long shadows, stretching and bending like something was lurking within them.
Sheila, do you have a lighter?
I asked, my voice barely a whisper. That was the signal. Sheila nodded. Skylar turned away for just a second, searching the ground, and that's when we struck. I plunged the knife into her side. The blade sliced through her skin like butter, sinking deep, cutting muscle, tearing through organs. Hot blood sprayed across my hands, sticky and thick. Skylar gasped, her mouth opening in shock before it twisted into agony. She shrieked a raw, ear-piercing sound. Her hands flew to the wound, her fingers trembling as they touched the deep gash in her side. Blood pulsed between them, spilling down her hoodie, soaking into the fabric, turning it dark and wet. She staggered forward, her knees buckling, but Sheila was on her before she could even process what was happening. The next stab went into her back, a crunch, then a wet squelch. Sheila yanked the blade out, and Skylar collapsed to her knees, shaking violently. Blood poured out of her, pooling around her on the dirt, sinking into the earth. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide with confusion and betrayal. Her lips trembled, forming words she couldn't get out. Her breaths came in ragged gasps, thick with blood, each one weaker than the last. But she wouldn't die. She wouldn't stop moving.
She's still breathing.
Sheila hissed, wiping the blood off her face with the back of her hand. Skylar tried to crawl away, her fingers clawing at the dirt, nails breaking off as she struggled to drag herself forward. I stepped over her, lifting the knife high. My heart pounded, my vision blurred, my hands were slick, the handle of the knife almost slipping from my grip. Then I brought it down, straight into her neck. Her body spasmed violently, her mouth opening in a silent scream. Blood sprayed, warm and thick, coating my face and dripping down my arms. Her throat gurgled, a horrible wet sound as she tried to breathe, drowning in her own blood. Sheila kicked her onto her back. Skylar's body twitched, her chest rising and falling unevenly, her eyes rolling back. She was still alive.
Finish it.
Sheila spat. I didn't think, I just stabbed. Over and over and over. Each thrust tearing through flesh, slicing veins, hitting bone. Blood sprayed up, hitting my face, my clothes, my skin. It was everywhere. The body beneath me twitched once, then stopped. The forest was silent. The smell of blood filled the air, thick and suffocating. The pool of red around Skylar seeped into the earth, soaking the dirt and covering my shoes, my hands, and my face. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, deafening. We had planned to bury her, but the ground was too hard. The shovel barely scraped the surface. It didn't matter anyway. There was too much blood. It was everywhere. So we left her there. We covered her with leaves and branches, but her hands still stuck out, fingers stiffening in the night air, nails caked with dirt and flesh. Her face was barely hidden beneath the foliage, eyes lifeless, mouth frozen in a silent plea. We got back into the car. The seats were soaked red. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. My clothes, my face drenched in blood. The scent clung to me and seeped into my pores. I could taste it on my tongue. We drove home in silence. My head was pounding. I could still hear it in my ears, choking,
gasping, bones cracking under the weight of our knives. For months, we acted like nothing happened. We posted her pictures online and handed out missing posters with our blood-stained hands. We cried in front of the cameras, hugged her parents, lied to their faces. But I heard her every night. Her screams echoed in my ears, her bloodied hands reaching for me in the darkness, her mouth twisted in agony. I felt the weight of her body under mine, her flesh splitting beneath my hands. It wouldn't go away, so I cracked. I told them everything. The trial was fast. The world recoiled. They called us monsters. Sheila tried to act tough in court, but I saw it. The fear in her eyes. She knew. She got life, no way out. I got 30 years, parole in 10. Skylar got a shallow grave in the woods where no one could hear her scream. I was lost in the trauma when the interviewer brought me back to reality. The journalist looked pale, his hands gripping the table, knuckles white. He clears his throat, voice barely above a whisper. Do you regret it? I don't answer right away. I let the question hang in the air like the stench of blood that will never wash off my hands. I meet his gaze.
Every single day.
The red light blinks. The interview is over, but my nightmare will never end. Skylar Neese, a 16-year-old from West Virginia, had two best friends, Sheila Eddy and Rachel Showoff. One night, the trio went out for a late-night drive, but it was a trap. Sheila and Rachel stabbed Skylar to death, leaving her body in the woods. The killers acted normal for months, even helping in the search for Skylar. Rachel later cracked under guilt and confessed, leading to Sheila's arrest. The reason the killers gave was that they didn't want to be friends with her anymore. Rachel got 30 years, eligible for parole in 10. Sheila got life in prison with parole eligibility after 15 years. They were best friends. Skylar had no idea she was walking to her own execution.